Test, test, okay. Hello, everyone. Just want to say a quick thank you all for coming. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes, so thanks.
Don't need a telemarketer call right now.
No, and my ringtone is off we go.
Oh, yeah.
So, and one of the men that's you'll see pictures. Remember the story about meeting my coach's brother?
I don't think I was able to include that one.
My coach told me when I went over just a day or two.
Yeah.
He said you might meet my brother McMullen.
Yeah. You told me that when we were looking at those ones.
His son is right there.
Oh, he is.
Front
Really?
row.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think I didn't put those pictures
Well,
in. I don't think there were any pictures actually.
Well, there's 2 or 3 on this.
Oh, there is.
There
Okay.
is, yeah. He and I together on our last mission. We were
Oh,
together.
that was your.
We flew my last mission
really?
with Jim, yeah.
Okay.
With Major McMullen, sir.
Gotcha.
I thought I saw Kevin, but I don't know if he's
Kevin
here.
Walden?
Yeah.
I
thought I did,
might
but it
be
was
coming.
somebody else.
I might hold off for even a couple more minutes. Looks like we still have people coming in.
My friend John Pierce from Concordia, do you know him? He's John Pierce?
No,
No, he's an old friend. He's a foundation. So every time I see him, I put my hand on my billfold. He knows it. He said everybody does. So. Vodka. It's vodka. You know, I never liked them. Never liked them. You know David by chance? Dave was coming. Is he? Oh, okay. Yeah, didn't have a cell phone in '69. We had the Mars, it was called, over the horizon. When the moon was right, whatever they called it, it was over the, I called Rose once. At midnight, my time, and she was noon, working at the clinic. And I called her over this, over. Yeah. David Mack. That's his other son.
Right here? Really?
Howdy, sir.
Raise you 5.
Huh?
How'd you do last night?
About even.
Okay. John must have.
John and I don't think Brad did too bad.
That corner was hot again. Yeah. Thank
Oh, no,
you
we
for
got it.
coming.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Glenn, I think we're going to get started here.
You're going to share one or my own? Is it hot?
Yep. Oh, yeah, it's hot. All right, everyone. We are going to get started, so grab your seats. Any other last-minute refreshments? And, yeah, this is quite the crowd, Glenn. You're pretty popular. Well, I want to introduce myself. My name is Max Sabin. I'm the curator here at the Fargo Air Museum. Just wanted to say thank you all for coming. We appreciate your your attendance, your donations, everything. The Fargo Air Museum, gets by your guys' help, and we really appreciate it. I'm joined today by Dr. Glenn Thoreson. He served in the United States Air Force from 1967 until 1969 and flew 21 combat missions with the 559th Tactical Fighter Squadron out of Cam Ranh Bay, South Vietnam. Dr. Thoreson, or Dr. T, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Max. It's an honor and a privilege to talk to fellow veterans and especially my Vietnam comrades. And a few of my neighbors are here. There's a story or two that are going to come up on the slides that will relate to some of my family and to some of my dear friends that grew up next to me. And I'm happy to share my story. I hope I don't oversell it. Most of it's true. It gets better. My family tells me that. So I'm happy to share and to press on.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get started. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where are you from, and what was your childhood like there?
Well, I'm from Mayville, born, grew up, high school, usual stuff, played sports, loved it, small town. And first year of college, I went to Luther College. My brother had gone there, so naturally your younger brother, he was older than I, but much older. Anyway, I followed him for a year, and then I made a good decision and transferred to Concordia and reacquainted myself with my wife. She was at St. Luke's School of Nursing. So two good decisions in one toss, transfer to Concordia and reconnect with my wife, Rose, or girlfriend, Rose. And we have now been married 60 years, so it worked out very nicely in that respect. After college at Concordia, I enrolled at UND Med School, 2 years at that time, certified 2 years, and everybody transferred to a 4-year school, which now, of course, UND is a fully fledged 4-year. And I transferred to the University of Kansas, and the med school is in Kansas City, even though the university is in Lawrence. And it was an era where those of us when I got to be a senior, there was a brouhaha going on in Southeast Asia, and we knew that as seniors, we better have planned our future or we're going to be there. And I didn't know for sure. I had an internship all set up at St. Luke's in Fargo. From 1960, July 166, July 167. Am I buzzing here?
Just a little feedback.
Okay. Anyway, I spent my internship here, but I had applied to the Air Force because I didn't want to go to the Navy or Army, and I wanted to pick what I want. And I applied to the School of Aerospace Medicine to be a flight surgeon. And people say, that's wonderful. What, you operate in the back seat of an airplane? You take gallbladders out in the back seat of an airplane? No. Flight surgeon is a pre-World War II term that deals with problems that pilots have and what they were learning about with airplanes going faster, higher, the consequences of flying with illnesses, steadying basically ear, nose, and throat problems. And during my internship, I applied for that and was accepted, and I became a young captain with my MD degree and spent I forget how many months, 6, 7 months at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio. And from there, posted to my first experience that, hey, I might be able to get to fly because I was sent to an Air Training Command base at Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. There they trained pilots, and I became accessible. No, that's not the word. I became invited if I wanted to learn the basics of flying. Not solo, not take off or land, but fly.
Gotcha. So as a doctor, were you treated differently during your flight training, your training that went into being a flight surgeon, or just basic training?
I didn't get the first part of the question.
Like, were you treated differently based on having your MD?
No, I was treated very well as far as the training goes because I had picked a section of medicine that I wanted to study, aerospace medicine, to be a flight surgeon and have access to flying. And some of my classmates just winged it, and they got drafted into the military. Maybe some of them became jungle surgeons, and I did not want to do that. And they had a tough job, a really tough job. I enjoyed the fact that I had a chance to fly. My boyhood classmate from grade 1 through Mayville State College, where he went to, his name was Richard Balstead. He retired after 30 years as full Colonel Richard Balstead. He went from Mayville State to the Air Force and got flying school right away. He qualified. And we grew up playing war games, summer games, hide-and-seek games with airplanes and building model airplanes, and I really admired him. He had an incredible history. He flew the F-4. That was another reason why I chose my career in the Air Force. Rich flew 100 missions over Hanoi and Haiphong in 1966 in 6 months. He was one of the earliest to do that and came home. When he flew, I was an intern, and I'll give you one anecdotal, how's that, for a story. Rich got to Da Nang is where he started. He was posted to Da Nang, and after 1 week, he wrote me from Da Nang to St. Luke's, and he said, Glenn, I flew my first mission today out of Da Nang and flew MiG cover over Hanoi. We protected the 105s and the 101s and whatever, they're both here, going in. And he said, I found out that they were shooting at me. And he summed it up by saying, the commies know that Balstead is here and they're damn mad. That was, and I have all of his letters to this day. He passed 2 years ago. We remained very close friends for a long time. So that is my track.
Gotcha.
to follow into flight.
Gotcha. So we're going to just backtrack just a second here. So tell us about what it was like training to get into the F4, and then I know you briefly touched on it, but what went into F4 flight surgeon training?
Okay. The flight surgeon training was at Brooks, and there we studied about the ear, nose, and throat problems. And basically we got from there to learning about the fact that we becoming eligible to be there's a word for it. I can't think of it. We were eligible as a flight surgeon to fly, to ride, or to go on board with a C-130 or a C-141. And luckily, my posting to Reese Air Force Base put me into the T-38 program, which the young pilots were all going through. And if that was a significant factor, that once I got transferred from Reese Air Force Base, when I got a letter from President Johnson at Christmas saying you have been transferred to Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam, effective June 1st, 1968. Be at Seattle McChord Joint Base and take off from there. So my training from flight surgeon to Reese Air Force Base with flying in T-38s, I had about 50 hours in the back seat. Again, no takeoff or landing, that's not my job. But that opened the door for me for eventually to be assigned to an F-4 squadron at Cam Ranh Bay and be strapped into the back seat.
So when you arrived at Cam Ranh Bay, what was it like? And did you immediately know that you were going to be assigned to the 559th?
I knew the 559th. I didn't know much about it. I arrived, a quick story, we left at 10 o'clock sharp, and we flew on a Northwest charter. The government chartered Northwest, Global, World, all kinds of airlines. Instead of flying in a military, we flew in a pretty nice airplane. And as we were ready to board at 10 o'clock, about 9:30, we all were out cordoned in from the fence so nobody could run away. And 30 minutes or so before the flight, the captain and the crew came out of the airplane. It was a Northwest 707 Stretch 300. Beautiful. And the captain came out, and I'm standing there, and he picked out the one that was the palest and maybe the most nervous, probably the funniest looking. And he stood by me, came over and stood by me. And he looked down and said, "Well, Captain Thoreson," he misspelled my name, misread it. "I see you're going to Cameron Bay. We're going to Tokyo first. We're flying to Yokota Air Force Base in Tokyo. And then the crew will change. You'll take the same airplane." And he looked at me and said, "Are you a pilot?" I said, "No, sir, I'm a flight surgeon." And his instant comment was, "Whoa, I was in the Air Force for 8 years before joining Northwest. Pilots don't like flight surgeons." Well, I said, "Thank you, sir. I'm just a rookie at this. I'm brand new. I know what you mean, though." And he said, "But I had a problem or two when I was in my military training, and I was well cared for. I got to be good friends with his flight surgeon for his squadron, whatever it was." And he said, "I like the flight surgeon. I appreciate that." He said, "Where are you sitting?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Show me your boarding." I gave him the boarding pass. And he looked at it, and he wrote down in his book of matches that he had for lighting a cigarette. And he said, "We'll get gear up, wheels up, and I'll have the hostess come back and get you." I said, "Yes, sir." I didn't know what to say. I was speechless. Got on the airplane, and 10 o'clock, down the runway, wheels up. It was deathly quiet in the airplane. There was no joy in that flight takeoff. All I heard was occasional cough and lots of this. Are we coming back in this airplane, or are we coming back on a C-141 and an aluminum box? And that was the general consensus of all of us. I didn't know a soul on board. An hour into the flight, the hostess comes back and said, "Captain Thoreson, the captain would like to see you in the cockpit." And I'm sitting three here and three here. And the guy sitting next to me, who I didn't know, he wondered, who in the heck is this guy? Well, I was a nobody. But the hostess took me up and knocked on the door, and I spent the next 45 minutes sitting in the cockpit between the captain and the first officer. Almost a daydream, talking about my background, where am I going, what are you going to do, do you want to fly, are you going to fly, what airplane are you going to be assigned to? That was my beginning of my entrance to Vietnam. We landed at Yokota, 3-4 hour layover, and then went to Cameron Bay. Landed at 6 in the morning, 90 degrees, 90% humidity, and the smell is still prevalent in my senses.
So you just described my second question, was the weather nice? So what other squadrons were stationed at Cameron with you?
I'm sorry?
What other squadrons were stationed at Cameron with
There are
you?
3 fighter squadrons under the 12th TAC Fighter Wing, the 557th, 558th, and the 559th. They all had nicknames. NDSU Bison, Concordia Cobbers. We were the 559th Billy Goats. So I became an instant Billy Goat. And the doctor that I was replacing, the flight surgeon, will affect some of my friends here in front seat. He met me and said, "Glenn, I'll take you in. Welcome. I'm going back on the airplane you came. Let me take you in and meet some of the men that you're going to be taking care of." And a prelude to that, my high school coach in high school met me at home before I left from Fargo to Seattle. His name was Harvey McMullen, legendary Mayville State pitcher, professor, and my high school coach for 2 years. He said, "Come back safely. We hope we'll be thinking of you. And by the way, my brother Jim McMullen, he's a major. He's over there someplace." He didn't have a clue where he was. He'd been there about 3 weeks. said, you might run in. I said, sir, or Harvey, Coach, I always call him Coach. I don't remember ever meeting him, but, well, you might look at his title on his shirt. So Zach, the guy I replaced, takes me in. I'll meet me and some of the ops officers here. And he takes me in, and the first thing I heard, welcome to the 559th, was, hey, the new quack is here. And I thought to myself, quack is not a complimentary name for a physician. I don't care if it was a rookie or you're 40-year. And Zach proceeded immediately to explain that if the squadron likes you, if you accept what they want to do and you want to fly and you're capable of doing it, you take good care of them, they like you, quack is a term of endearment. Well, it kind of worked out pretty good. I was the quack from there on. But he took me in and he said, this is Major Johnson, this is Colonel Little, this is Major McMullen. I said, excuse me, sir. Major McMullen, is it possible you were born in Hoople, North Dakota, and your brother is Harvey? And he was dumbfounded. And the dumbfounded Major McMullen was pretty good. He said, how in the hell did you know that? Because your brother Harvey was my high school coach. And he said I might run into you. I ran into him in 1 hour in Vietnam. And we hit it off beautifully. Not only did we become close friends, I flew with him. Our last mission was together. We told stories about the Minnesota Twins. He hated the Minnesota Twins. Harmon Killebrew was awful. We would have a cold one now and then, and we were roommates besides. So the association was instant. And Jim and I, when he retired, he moved back to Mayville next door to me. So the circle was complete, and his two sons are here. You can't make that up.
All right, so.
I skipped ahead.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So what was your job in the back seat of an F-4?
Okay, when I got there, the commander, whose name was, he was Lieutenant Colonel, but he was the squadron commander, Paul Cotto, K-A-U-T-T-U. He was an incredible leader. He came to our squadron as from his last job was he was boss lead of the Thunderbirds. So you know his personality, his skill, and incredible man. And we became pretty close friends. I got to, after checking in and getting settled for a week, Colonel Cotto called me into his office, and I said, geez, I've been here a week. You know, what have I done? And he said, Glenn, I've been looking at your record from Reese Air Force Base. You have many hours flying. We are short of backseat pilots, and you as a flight surgeon are qualified to learn, if you want to be trained in to become a backseat co-pilot. Now, take off and land? No. Backseat to help the aircraft commander. And the backseater was not known as the backseater. There are several names. Many of them are not good. But the one universally accepted, for anybody here know what the backseater of an F-4 was? What do they call him? Gib. G-I-B, Gib. And I said, sir, what's a Gib? Guy in the back seat. Guy in the back. Boy, that's pretty heavy. True story. And he somehow took a liking to me. Why, I don't know. But he said, if you're willing and able, if you're willing and want to, we're short of backseat pilots. My lieutenants will put you in the backseat on the ground every day for the next month. Teach you the -1. You know what a -1 is? Those guys. The -1 is a manual on what to do, how to sew a new suit, how to build a table. Well, I'm not one to learn by reading how to do something. Show me how to do something. And the -1 is a manual on how to operate and run the back seat of an F-4. And I said, sir, count me in. He said, well, if you succeed and you'll have a check ride, you will be mission qualified. So the young lieutenants took me out of the office early every afternoon for a month or 6 weeks, whatever it was, and proceeded to tell me how to strap in. Now, you don't climb into a back seat of an F4. You strap an F4 on. You have multiple seat belts, harness belts across your shoulders, and there's 2 or 3 hoses you plug in: oxygen, the electronic one for the communication with the pilot and talking to other airplanes, and the G suit. The G suit is a G suit that it's like expansion from below my pants here and my Air Force socks up to your waist. And as you pull G's, it automatically senses and expands and pulls your gut in, your legs in, and puts blood up to your brain. Some will say my G suit failed a few times. It was optional to bring that up, but anyway, so they put me back there, and I learned how to do the navigation with the inertial navigation system, the INS, which was the most sophisticated at the time in the military. It got us from Cam Ranh to Phan Rang to Da Nang to Pleiku and back again if you put the right latitude and longitude in. So they worked me over. I learned the radar. I learned the radio communications, and I seemed to pick it up. And after 4 weeks, one of the young lieutenants reported to the boss, Colonel Cotto, and we called him boss, respectfully, and said, the doc can do it, but he needs a check ride. Well, that makes sense. So Colonel Cotto called me in. Doc, he said, the lieutenants think you can hack this, but we do want a check ride, and I've got you on the board for 2 days from now. So we report as if it was a combat strike, and this was not a combat strike. This was a clean airplane checking out the back seat, the gib. Did I know what to do to get the airplane off the ground, get us from Cam Ranh to, we flew to Da Nang, Phan Rang, Pleiku, and back to Cam Ranh if I got the right data put in the machine. And we did. And we were all through with that part of it, and we said, Doc, we got a little extra fuel. How fast have you gone in the airplane? I said, sir, I hit Mach 1, I think, once in the T-38. He said, well, let's see if we can do it, what we can do about that. So we went out over the South China Sea, and he said, hang on, we're going up to 45,000. And he lit the burners, and up we go, 45,000 feet. And he said, all right, Doc, hang on, we're going to roll it over, and I'm going to shut off the left engine. I said, say again, sir. He said, well, I'm going to air start it. We'll roll it down. I'll pull back the throttle, pull it to the stop, and as they gain airspeed by simply going vertically down with one engine, air flows through it. He adds power and fuel, and the engine lit. Okay, we'll roll up again 45 due to the other engine. And we did succeed. And I thought, whew, that's fun. That's going to the South China Sea at high speed. He said, we got one more trick. This time for you, we're going to go up 45, and I'm not going to shut down an engine, but I'm going to light the afterburners. And the 2 J79 General Electric engines lit at 45, and we went 45-degree angle to the South China Sea. Now, the sea is coming up at us, and the Mach reader, I could read in the back, read Mach 1.4. Now, that's ballpark 12 to 1,300 miles an hour. That's as fast as I had ever gone, and none since either, and even in my little Mustang out here. So I was tested, and the next day the boss called in and he said, Doc, you are qualified to fly your first combat strike. And that was when I told my wife that I was learning to fly as a gib in the F4, and I'm going to be in combat. And I don't know how long it took to get a letter from Rose. She's sitting over here someplace. I don't think she was very happy about it, but secretly I think she knew that this was a dream for a little kid from Mayville with no military background is going to fly combat in the back seat of an F-4 in a war zone in an incredibly strong squadron. And I flew. I succeeded, I guess, and I flew a total of 21 combat strikes all over South Vietnam, never at night, never up north. Didn't belong there because the back seat, I'm sorry, I was not trained for missile launch and all that stuff. But I was capable, and they even gave me the stick. I had full stick throttle and rudder, so they let me, let's see what you got, Doc. Can you fly it straight? Well, I couldn't to start with. I was the famous porpoise, which is normal. Finally, I developed a little skill level, and eventually I was competent enough, if that's not bragging, but I could fly it straight and level, and on the way back from our strike missions, they'd give me the stick. You got it, Doc. And we'd fly back to Cameron, and sometimes we did a little fun on the way back, and if we were front or back, we'd fly under the other airplane to see if there was any damage and so on. So that's how I got into the position to fly.
Gotcha. So, as many of you probably have noticed, we have a very impressive selection of photographs that are up on stage. And I remember, Glenn, you were telling me that you were one of the few guys allowed to carry a camera in the back seat. Do you want to touch a little bit on how you were allowed to do that?
Okay. I did have a camera, and people would say, well, how in the world can you take pictures if you're busy in the back seat? How can you snap a picture? Well, you're not busy all the time. On the way to a strike, a combat mission, we're busy. After the mission is called, and we may or may not get into the action, but on the way home, typically, when we were clean and all ready to get back, I took my 35 millimeter Pentax Spotmatic, and or I'd take an airplane picture of a guy flying next to us, or if we were lead, and I did fly. They trusted me even to be the lead one. I would take the wingman, or if I was a wingman, we'd take the lead. And my airplane, I was privileged after about 3 months. The boss called us in and he said, Doc, you've been selected along with Lieutenant Colonel Apple for the privilege, I call it, to put a name on the nose of the airplane. Now that is something that was not only surprising to me, but to this day it's a treasure. And there will be a picture of it. And my wife's name is Rose, and I called her Rose. Everybody called her Rosie. And his wife's name was Dolores. And he called her Betty. No. He called her Dee. The airplane became the Rosie D. And it's on the pictures of my plane. I have many pictures of it on slides. And that is a major thrill in my brief military career. Not only flying, but to get a name on an airplane.
Absolutely. All right, so what other larger, smaller aircraft were stationed at Cameron alongside your F-4s?
Well, there are 3 major F-4 squadrons, and we also had C-130s. They're still flying, by the way. The C-130 is 80 years old almost. And we had a squadron of, we call it the Buck 19s, which flew the Agent Orange people that dropped this incredibly stupid dioxin on the jungle to defoliate the trees to expose the enemy. And think about it. When you're flying over, some of you guys have been out in the jungle. You have seen the airplane with, it's called Operation Ranch Hand, and it's like spraying a crop of corn. This stuff coming out right over the top of you guys in the jungle. And they have found that not only did it not do much for the enemy, but it hurt our own troops, and most of all, the residual effects on our GIs on the ground are incredible. Side effects, killing them. pancreatitis, Parkinson's, neurologic diseases, diabetes, skin problems, and it passed on to their generation. When they had a child, the child could very well carry it with them. So whoever decided to put Agent Orange was devastating. That was our major supply of airplanes. We had helicopters. Everybody had helicopters.
Gotcha. So, can you tell us a little bit about your final flight? I know you mentioned your lead pilot or command pilot, but I know there was a little special story in there that you've been wanting to tell that relates to your call sign.
The last mission is a term that I had to learn about. And we have pictures of it if it comes up. This is it right here. The last mission was scheduled for 53 years ago this week, May 6, 1969. The last mission is they schedule you. It was a combat strike, but I think they all put you in the position, your last strike, to be maybe a relatively safe haven area. Milk run, they called it in war too. Whatever, Major McMullen, my dear friend, got to be, and the sons here, we were picked to fly our last mission. And as you'll see, we did put a strike in. There's no doubt about that. We had four napalms that we put on 2 strikes, two passes. On the way home, we were fine. On the way, safe. And I had talked to the crew chief of our airplane before, and there's wild ducks all over Vietnam. They feed themselves. You don't feed ducks in Vietnam. They feed themselves. And I talked to the top sergeant that was our crew chief, and I said, Sarge, can possibly you find a duck? And that when Major Mack and I are on the way back, you'll know it because the operations knows your airplane's coming home. And he said, what are you going to do with the duck? Well, when we land, hoping we get back safely, if I see you in a Jeep coming out toward us halfway down the runway coming in, I'll know that you have a duck. And he said, you want me to put the duck in your back cockpit? I said, Raj. He said, well, that's a first. And he said, it might be a first in the Air Force. And we landed. Jim McMullen, Major, even though he was Jim, I knew him Jim in our hooch. He was Major Mack on the intercom. I said, Major Mack, sir, you see the Jeep coming out? Yeah, what's up? I said, he's got a duck, and he's going to stop, and I'm going to put the duck in the back of this cockpit, in my cockpit, and we're going to taxi into where we stop, called a revetment. And that duck is going to be released after we shut the engine off. If the engine was on and let the duck out, of course, I'd still be in Leavenworth. And you see in the bottom right, up here or whatever, the Sarge came out, had a duck, put it in the cockpit, we taxied in, shut the engine off, and I'm holding down, a duck down here flapping, and you can see in the bottom right, I released the duck. And henceforth, I became the quack with a duck. True story. You can't make that up. And it worked. And it might be the only time in history where the duck became a passenger in the last 200 yards.
Yeah, I have never heard of anything even remotely close to like that.
Yeah. So that was our last mission. Now you'll see, if you see, the last mission involves the fire department coming out, hosing you down, champagne flowed on your head. You drank it, you poured it on the ground, you poured it on Jim, Major Mack, he poured it on me, we soaked each other. The firemen, if you have more pictures of the firemen.
Unfortunately, that's just the...
That's what it is,
yeah.
okay. Anyway, that's the hose down. That was the end of my career in the military and the end of Major McMullen's career in the F-4. he had a couple of years left of active duty, but not in the F-4. The final mission is a pretty special deal.
Absolutely. Now, Glenn, one more question. I remember you telling me about a specific story about one of your darkest days during your Air Force career. Do you care a little bit to touch on that?
I would be happy to. January 28th, 1969. Our squadrons flew on a monthly basis, a week of days, a week of nights, a week of alert, and a week off. This was our week of alert. And when our squadron, we stayed at an alert shack. That's where the squadron was ready for, because they'd bring the bell and geez, the guys would, fire up and get out. And I stayed with them that week each time. And in the morning of January 28th, Major McMullen's roommate his name is Bob Cameron, and he was scheduled to fly that alert flight along with his Gib, who was also in the squadron, obviously, they were scrambled, and it was about 5 in the morning, hot, humid, dark, just twilight. And as they taxied out, he and Lieutenant Tom Burge taxied out, and as they got clearance to be on the active runway, they hit the throttles, and the air conditioner in the cockpit of the aircraft commander, Major Cameron, failed. And the cockpit condensed. You see that, you can understand what happens. It's high, hot humidity, and he lost track of the runway. Now, he was still hurtling down the runway. He wasn't ready to rotate, or he was close. Unfortunately, not close enough. And he lost track of the runway. And he went off the runway. There is a picture on the top left of Major Bob Cameron. I happened to fatefully take a picture of those two guys that day. I took pictures all the time, on the ground, of course. This was, quiet time for me. And those two happened to be, their call sign that night was Boxer 1, and they were on alert, and they were ready to go. And I just took the picture. 4 hours later, this accident happened where he lost track of the runway, went off the side of it, and he hit a concrete stanchion that holds the tapes that go across the runway if you have to have a carrier-type landing on the ground. And he was killed instantly. The backseater had tried to bail out, and they were too low, and the nose was down. The Martin Baker seat system is an incredible seat, but it's meant to be at least level, even on the ground. It would get you high enough, but the nose wheel was gone, and the front nose came out. And Major Cameron, sir, was killed instantly, and Tom Burge, who bailed out, was insufficiently elevated. At that point, of course, the firemen, the ambulances, the squadron was notified, and I jumped in the ambulance and went out to the accident scene. And as you can see, it went off the runway and went. If the runway is going this way, the airplane ended up this way. And the firemen were there promptly. And the fireman, who I didn't know really, was the one in charge, and he got on the wing and could see that both pilots were dead. And he signaled to the guy with the bullhorn, everybody clear the area. There's still ammunition, gas, fuel, rockets, CBUs, especially the rockets. And as the firemen started to clear, one of the firemen just came over and he said, he just came over and stood by me. We were probably 40, 50 yards away as we were backing up. All of a sudden, one of the rockets lit off. And the rocket went through the airplane from one side, through it, exploded and sent shrapnel. And a fireman who I didn't know his name, he had his Michelin suit on. You can't tell anything about him because he's covered. A piece of shrapnel took his right arm off like a scalpel. And he had injuries all over from the pieces of shrapnel, but his major trauma was his right arm was gone. And without thinking, you don't think about, gee, I should go and help this guy. You just react. And I went to his safety, or tried to get him to safety. I got the bleeding stopped, and the other people came in to help me and pulled him away from it, got him to the ambulance, and he lived. He lost his arm, but he lived. That was 1969. 46 years later, flash forward, for 6 months I had tried to contact the Air Force, anybody who knew the condition of this fireman. I didn't know his name. Was he black, white, Chinese? Was he single, married? Where did he live? Or was he alive at all? And I worked through the channels of Air Force annals and websites, and I got a hit on the date. It was a trigger for finding out the name of this fireman that I helped. And there was an email attached to it, and I sent an email to this address blindly with my phone number. This was a Friday in 2015, 46 years later. Monday morning, the phone rings at 9 o'clock. I'm retired now, or part-time. And I picked the phone up and he said, "Is this Captain Thoreson?" Well, nobody's called me Captain Thoreson since 1969. It was the fireman. And I got his name. He said, "My name is Sergeant Don McCullough, but call me Sergeant Mack, and I want to come and see you, Captain." This was a Monday. He said, "Where do you live?" "Fargo." "Where the hell is Fargo?" He was in Chicago, a small town outside of Chicago. And he said, "What are you doing Friday?" I said, "I'll be here Friday." He said, "So will I." He got in his car and drove alone from Coal City, Chicago area, Illinois, and drove up in my driveway at noon 4 days later. I had found the sergeant, and he's here tonight. Sergeant, Sergeant Don McCullough, Chief Fireman, Sergeant Mack. They like you already, Mac. Tell me, when I called you that tonight we were celebrating our Vietnam stories, and I wanted you to be here, and Max made all the appointments and phone calls and reservations, and you accepted. Thank you. You look great. And how you doing, bud?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing a lot better now than I was a long time ago.
What do you remember about January 1969 when the airplane crashed and you were part of the leadership of the fire crew? He was second in command. Tell us what you did.
Well, upon arrival at
But here, up closer to your
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
I'm not used to these microphones. When I got
Closer.
closer, okay, that's better. Okay. So what was the question again? Sorry.
The question, how did you feel? What do you recall before you got hit by this shrapnel? What did you visualize? What did you hear? What did you feel?
Well, I felt a lot of panic. That's for certain. But the first thing we always thought of was the air crew, and from there, myself and I think there was one other fellow with a water hose behind us, and or just in front. And we got up to the wing of the aircraft, and I could see from that position that there was no one in the aircraft at that point. And so we turned around and, well, no, we didn't turn around. We backed out of the area, and we got just a short distance, and I looked, and I thought it was coming from way back. I still do today, but maybe not.
You saw a flash or an
I
explosion?
No, all I seen was a white light coming at me. I mean, the brightest light you ever seen in your life. And didn't realize at the moment because it was just the tension, and I just kept on backing up, and first thing I knew then, I heard this guy talking to me, and we was getting in the ambulance, I believe that's what it was. And guys were making me as comfortable as can and doing things to me, and I don't even remember now exactly what they were doing, but it didn't make any difference to me. I couldn't do anything against it. But it was Captain Thoreson here, and he was just taking the best care I ever had in the hospital. He got me back to the hospital and had the bleeding under control, and the last thing I remember, they was cutting my suit off of me with a pair of big scissors and saying, "Can you count from 99 backwards," or something like that. And I says, "What I want to do that for?" He says, "Just start counting." I says, "Okay." So I did, and that's the thing. Last I remember for approximately 2 weeks is all I remember. Last I recall at all about that night or morning.
We have talked several times about it, and we talk every year 2 or 3 times. I call Mac on Veterans Day, Memorial Day, other times just a spontaneous call. And he said he remembers this flash bullet-like white light coming to him. I was standing 3 feet from him. I was not injured. He was injured. The explosion blew me into the sand behind me. Big deal, knocked me down. I wasn't hurt. But I was able to get to him, and he was dressed in his fire suit. You can't see the man. You can see the fire suit and a person inside. And the bleeding was profuse. He had shrapnel wounds all over his belly. And I got the bleeding stopped, and by that time the ambulance was there, and the other firemen came and helped me get him into the ambulance. And he spent about 10 days at Cameron getting stable. Got the bleeding stopped, got him able to travel. He needed extra care, and we sent him to, did you go to Walter Reed or West Coast?
No, it was, this was about, it was about 2.5 or 3 weeks later.
From the hospital at Cameron.
Yeah, and I went to Great Lakes.
Great Lakes, okay. And you were there, you were rehabilitated. He had prosthetics fit for his arm. Tell us about how many prosthetic arms you went through, and what do you feel about a prosthetic arm? politely.
Oh, well, they make in my opinion, I mean, they make a good arm for a fishing pole.
He didn't like the arm. He had 2 or 3 fittings, and he said, I'd get in the car and I would finally be privileged to drive. He's told me this many times. And he said the right arm just got in the way. He took it off, threw it in the back seat, and drove left-handed. And he drove from Chicago left-handed. And he's a right-handed dominant guy.
Yes, and it was a very pleasant arrival, too. We've been good friends for some time now.
You drove into my driveway after a 2-day, 3-day trip, and my wife was there, my grandson was there, Reed, and Reed is here tonight.
Yeah.
We had dinner together,
Yeah.
and let's see, you and I, there was 2 or 3 of my Mary, I think Mary, my daughter is here. Mary, were you there too? What? Okay.
Chicken later.
Yeah. Anyway, we had a reunion that was incredible when he showed up. And he spent the weekend with us. We talked, we laughed, we showed pictures, we showed our, we both received some nice medals, if that's the word, citations. And a camaraderie that was restored after 46 years. Continues to this day from 2016. We are foxhole friends
That's
and
for sure.
comrades from the 559th Fire Squadron to his as a chief of the Firemen's Squadron. And we're just pleased to have Sergeant Mack here today. And his progress, he's alive, he's well, he's functioning. He just doesn't like prosthetic arms.
Thank you.
Any comments, Mac?
Well, I could probably make a lot of them, but I'll tell you, this kind of surprised me. The first one surprised me. I never thought I'd meet up with anyone, especially an officer in the military. It kind of blew my mind, you know, but I've gotten used to it. He's a great guy. And I have no regrets of my service or my friendship with this man.
Thank you, Mac. We talk and we cry and we have a great relationship, and to find him after 46 years doing this well is just heartwarming. And I've got pictures of him all over my, Kevin Wallovan called it my man cave.
I have a man cave too now.
You got a man cave too, okay. So we're happy to be here and share the story with you, and we're extremely proud of your successful recovery, and we will keep talking and be friends forever.
Ever is right. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Mack. His son David is here and drove him this time, so he had help driving, and he will spend a day or two here yet. But a great story. You can't make this stuff up. And to reconnect, 46 years. It took 6 months, and that phone call I will never forget.
No, I'll never forget it either.
Okay. Thank you, Mac.
Yes, thank you.
David? Love you.